Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and be speaking with everybody. Apologies for the mask, I'm in a library. But yeah, so today's panel is going to be on the demands of the tuition strike. What I heard from the panelists in the last one is kind of this overarching importance of student activism. And I think what we're trying to do in our movement is kind of coalesce various student movements and really push for the things that students have been fighting for, not just for months, but for years. So I'm so happy to have all of our amazing panelists be here with us today. So I want to go around briefly if everybody here can introduce themselves. We have GWC here, CPW, MAD, Sunrise. And so if everyone can go around and kind of say their name and then what their organization is and what they're fighting for currently, that would be lovely. And we can start with the GWC.
Hey, I'm Susanna from GWC. I'm a fifth year PhD student in the history department and department organizer. Yeah, nice to meet everyone.
And then we'll pass it off to Joe.
Hi, my name is Joe. I'm a postdoctoral research scientist in the Department of Psychiatry at the Columbia Medical Center. I was on the bargaining committee that negotiated the first postdoc private university union contract here at Columbia. And I'm currently a steward for my district and an organizer for my district as well.
Lovely, thank you so much, Joe. And then we'll pass it off to Mad.
Hi, sorry the video is off. We're trying to be like a little bit anonymous, not that anonymous though. Anyway, I'm a senior at Columbia Engineering. MAD is an organization of mostly undergrads, but we have some like grad students and TC people who are involved. And we're pushing for a lot of the same things that Black students have been pushing for since 1968. So like a less exploitative relationship with Black community members, more Black faculty, more support for Black students. And these are demands that have been around for so long and like Lena said, are things that people have been pushing for, not for months, but for years. And so if you care, I guess, about like Black lives and about Black students, sign our demands and also support the tuition strike.
Thank you so much, Mad. And then I'll pass it on to Towns from Sunrise.
Howdy, y'all. My name's Towns. I am one of the organizers with Sunrise Columbia-Barnard and also one of the organizers with Sunrise YDSA. So kind of doing double duty here. But yeah, I'm just want to talk a little bit about the demand for divestment, for fossil fuel divestment, that is, I think, integral to this petition. We want to make sure that we're, using the university's resources to their maximum extent to try and make social change. And that's something that students have been fighting for tens, dozens of years. And I'll give a little bit of background on today. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here, Towns. So perfect. I'm so happy we got to go around and do introductions, and I'll introduce myself. My name is Lena. I'm the coalitions coordinator for YDSA, and I'll be talking for a little bit about kind of how the tuition strike formed and what the past few months have looked like. And then I will pass it over to our coalition partners to kind of do presentations on their demands and how their movements came about. So I'll go through quickly the demands of the tuition strike, just an overview. So our first demand and kind of what came about first was the demand to alleviate the economic burden on students through a tuition reduction and financial aid increase. And this also includes for some schools a waiver of the student contribution that students are charged. The next demand is for the university to fulfill its responsibilities to the people of West Harlem, including affordable housing, education, and employment. The third demand is to defund public safety and invest in community safety solutions that prioritize the safety of Black students and West Harlem residents, and also to cut ties from the NYPD. The fourth demand is to commit to complete transparency about university investments and respect the democratic votes of the student body regarding investment and divestment decisions. And the fifth demand is to bargain in good faith with unions on campus around their key demands for improved compensation, benefits, and protections. So I really want to emphasize here that most of our demands come from like the amazing work of our coalition partners over the past few years. And there are movements that Columbia has had going on for so long. And so we are really trying to work together as like a formidable coalition to push Columbia to adequately acknowledge and respond to all of these things. So kind of how the tuition strike got started is over this summer and earlier this year after the pandemic set on. YDSA talked to a lot of students across campus and was asking basically, you know, what was the largest burden that they felt or what did they feel needed to be changed about the university. And kind of across the board for all students, tuition was a huge burden that they felt. So we kind of knew we wanted to do a campaign on that, but Columbia has a track record of disregarding student movements and of inadequately responding to things. And so we knew we needed to place like very strong pressure on the university. So kind of what better to do that than a strike? Because students are not just students, we are funders of the university, we are tenants of the university, we are workers of the university, and we have been continuously, our voice has been taken away from us. And so we need to kind of affirm our power through a tactic like a strike, because we do function in all those other ways through the university as well. So we started organizing over the summer around this demand for a tuition reduction, financial aid increase, and we wrote a petition at the beginning of the school year to the university asking for it, with 400 students signed on, and the university did not respond. So after that, we continued organizing and our numbers continued to grow. And as they grew, we realized that we had the potential to address all of these other student movements that Columbia had not adequately responded to. And in kind of researching the university's financial investments, we realized that part of the reason it was so resistant to reducing tuition was because it had all these other predatory and exploitative investments in other areas, like in gentrification in Harlem, in human rights abuses in Palestine, in fossil fuels. And so kind of to win our demands, we needed the liberation of investments from all of these other places and the liberation of all these other groups. So once we realized that, you know, we had the potential not only to address these, but almost like an obligation to, because these movements had all kind of contributed to the student activism on campus that bubbled into ours, we voted on the demands to include, and we included all of these, and all of our signatories voted in a majority to include all of them. And since then, a lot of students have been inspired and signed on, and we have over 4,250 students on our pledge currently. And we hope to continue to fight until Columbia addresses all of these demands. So that's a bit of kind of an overview of how the tuition strike came about and how each of these demands got folded in. And I want to give space to each of our coalition partners to talk about their movements and how they kind of formed and what the history of their demands have been. So I will first pass it on to Mad to do that. They'll be sharing a presentation. And if you have questions, please send them in as we go, and then we'll address them at the end in a Q&A session that we'll have.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Lena. All right, cool. So I'm going to be talking on behalf of Mobilized African Diaspora. We have some contacts in the lower corner if you guys ever want to contact us. So I wanted to give a brief overview on what is MAD, because a lot of people aren't really familiar with our organization. Maybe you know like BSO or other Black student groups on campus, but I wanted to give a brief background on who we are and then why it's so important to support the work we're doing right now. So here is our mission statement. We're a coalition of Black people at and affected by Columbia University, committed to organizing against racism and structural oppression on campus and beyond. And so we don't represent the voices of all Black people within the community, but we want to function as an open platform to combat violences and also amplify those who aren't being heard by Columbia. So MAD, a little bit of history, was started by a group of Black Columbia students around like 2014, 2015, and then was operational for a couple years before going on break. A lot of people graduated, and we resumed operation last spring after Alex McNabb, I guess it was 2 springs ago now, after Alex McNabb was racially profiled and restrained by multiple Barnard public safety officers while trying to enter Milstein Library. And so MAD published a statement to Columbia, and then some of the previous actions that we were involved in was around 2015, in response to the non-indictment of Daniel Pantaleo in the murder of Eric Garner, the Columbia BSO, as well as with MAD and some other coalition partners, organized a die-in, which occurred during Columbia's tree lighting ceremony. And during the ceremony, hundreds of student protesters dressed in all Black and laid down across College Walk, holding tombstones bearing the names of various victims of police brutality, including Mike Brown, Tamir Rice. And after the demonstration began, in true Columbia fashion, they called the NYPD, who arrived on the scene to like a very calm student protest, nonviolent student protest, in riot gear with several police wagons and communications vans. So that was one big action for MAD. Another one is the one that you see in the background of this slide, which was called the TJB Day campaign, which sought to remove the Thomas Jefferson statue that currently stands outside Pulitzer. Organizers draped a KKK hood over the hat of the statue and held signs that read, "Memorializing this rapist makes sexual assault on this campus acceptable, and Columbia is and has always been anti-Black." So right now we are currently organizing against anti-Blackness and NYPD ties in public safety, like Lena mentioned, as well as focusing on Columbia's exploitative relationship with West Harlem. And so here's like a quote a little bit from a founder. MAD is committed to like a radical queer feminist lens because our founding was influenced so much by Black women on campus. And so also she talks about Orgo Night and those protests that happened in around 2012, and also about the history of Black student movements on campus since 1968, since like the apartheid protests, the tent cities. Like Black students have been organizing for so long. And so now MAD is adding, like she says, mechanics or formal consistency to Black student organizing that has been cultivated and also unappreciated the work of Black queer women. All right, so to really put our demands into context, I wanted to give a little bit of background on Columbia's relationship with West Harlem. I don't think it's something that you really learn as a student, and I don't know, it's really frustrating that you can pass through 4 years at this university and not understand the neighborhood in which you're living or where your buildings came from or who lived in your dorm before you did. So for a couple things to note, when you talk about Columbia's relationship with West Harlem, a lot of times people think like, oh, Columbia is a very liberal school with progressive students, like its administration. That's the reason why the university is capable of doing like some pretty terrible things. And I want to push back on that because Columbia students were not passive actors in the gentrification of West Harlem. Like maybe now the politics have changed, but back in the 70s, they were very, very active participants in resident evictions and were also huge supporters of efforts to clean up the community. During the war on crime era of the 1970s, students pleaded that if the university did not occupy land, which is the exact words they use, in Harlem with the backing of police, Columbia would weaken and ultimately be destroyed. And so it was Columbia students who ultimately advocated for the expansion of their university as well as the over-policing of Harlem. They wrote op-eds, they wrote petitions, and they used and drew from very similar myths of Black criminality, which accompany lynching, which accompany instances of police brutality. And so Columbia University students are on the record demeaning and erasing the surrounding community and also naming Columbia itself the savior of quote unquote deteriorating neighborhoods. And so I have some like spec articles. I can put them in chat later, but they talk a lot about the, not even complicit is not the word because they were like actively participating, but the way that students pushed Columbia and encouraged this sort of exploitative relationship. So slums, blight, foci of infection, these were all phrases that Columbia students as well as administrators used to describe the surrounding community. And for example, in 1947, a spec article described Manhattanville as a breeding ground of poverty, disease, and crime. And it was this characterization that was used in the creation of a group called the Morningside Heights Incorporated. So Morningside Heights Incorporated was an urban renewal group that consisted of Columbia-Barnard, JTS, the Manhattan School of Music, and a couple other uptown wealthy white institutions. And so in 1958, a report from MHI stated that redevelopment and the acquisition of local buildings was the only way to secure the future of the neighborhood. And I bring this up because, yes, it's from the 60s, like it feels kind of long ago, but also this is exactly what Columbia did. If you read the 1958 report, they have like step by step acquired all the single residency occupancy buildings, turned those into student dorms. And if you go back, they laid out the entire plan. Like they laid out the entire plan for what they wanted the neighborhood to be. And that's where you are right now. Like this was planned. This was not some sort of natural process of like, oh, universities need more space, or the way they try to spin it. Like, no, there was an urban renewal group called Morningside Heights Incorporated that published reports on like the successes of Columbia in changing the neighborhood, in renewing the neighborhood, as they say, and also in occupying more and more land. Additionally, MHI, or Morningside Heights Incorporated, also laid the foundation for our current public safety system. They architected it as a community patrol. And I don't know if you've read the spec article that talks about students and their role in promoting gentrification, but to acquire private property and to police it is like, I don't know, the most common form of anti-Blackness that we've seen across. So to acquire slaves and then to use like slave patrols to acquire private property and use police to prosecute it, in the same way to acquire land within the neighborhood and then create a community patrol to keep people out of it. Ooh, sorry, okay. So now that we have like a little bit of history, I wanted to also talk about moving forward. So Columbia's most recent expansion is Manhattanville. It's the one that the YDSA demands refer to when they talk about a $6.3 billion expansion. That is Manhattanville. It's mostly built now, I want to say. If you walk down, you can see like the Zuckerman Center, the Mind, Brain, and Behavior Center. And so after doing this and after this great big expansion, Columbia created this thing called the Community Benefits Agreement. But like I said, once again, Columbia fashion, it's not a good faith document and it expires in 2040. And so while Columbia will continue to make money from this campus uptown for, I don't know, this campus has been around since what, 1789? So for hundreds of years, they only, I guess in their minds, need to support the community until 2040, which is kind of crazy. And so that was where MAD actually started this summer, was to try and develop alternatives that are stronger, more binding infrastructure, as well as more robust replacements to Columbia's current relationship to community, which is literally just cash payouts. It's almost like a debt. Like they're like, okay, fine, we expanded. We're going to do these cash payouts that support nonprofits. We're not going to create a fund. We're not going to create something that we invest in that's long-term. We're just going to pay out whatever $100 million we need to, and then we're going to be done with it in 2040 and never pick it up again. And so that's one thing that talks about Columbia's relationship with community. The other thing is affordable housing, which if you follow the fund, Columbia has not been able to provide any affordable housing because, well, when you gentrify, the property values go up and the original amount of money that they set aside to build affordable housing is no longer viable. You can't buy anything in West Harlem now for $9 million or $10 million. And so, but there is some remaining affordable housing in MCD 9, which is Manhattan Community District 9, where we are located, mostly in the form of HDFCs, co-ops, as well as Grant Manhattanville Public Housing. So that's kind of the situation that we're in right now. All right, so this is where we started this summer after the murders of George Floyd and after like everything happened, which was a really, really crazy time. We extensively researched and compiled our demands from a multitude of sources, including Morningside Heights Community Coalition, Community Board 9 members, Columbia Spec reports from like a lot of older CB9 members who aren't as active anymore, as well as Community Board 9's 197A plan for the Manhattanville expansion. So the Community Board actually understood that Columbia was going to do the expansion and created a plan, one that was much more supportive and much more equal and less exploitative. Columbia ignored their plan and went along with whatever they wanted to do. And so our demands focus, number one, on community. And so you can actually go and see the demands. They're super, super detailed, but within the community in West Harlem tab, we talk a lot about employment and also affordable housing. So if Columbia wants to be the anchor institution within the neighborhood that it claims to be, two of the things it should provide to residents affected by displacement are gainful employment as well as affordable housing. And so we talk a lot about that, about like union pipelines and different ways that Columbia can support West Harlem residents. The second thing we talk about is NYPD ties. So Columbia doesn't contract out to the police, but they also used to run this program through the business school called the Police Management Institute, which was for NYPD executives. And so even though this is not contracting, it's still supporting the development of careers of people involved with a super racist institution. Next, we want to talk about reimagining public safety. And so we talk a lot about divesting, but what's really most important to us is divestment from public safety and also investment into Columbia Health and SVR and the creation of 24-hour in-person healthcare. And so we talk a lot about how Columbia perceives safety and perceives danger to be mostly Black, male, and non-affiliate, when really, if you look at the experiences of students, a big and like ever-present threat of danger is literally just sexual assault on campus, and something that Columbia isn't putting enough, not just funding, but also support in for survivors. I know there was that CU Survivors Instagram account like over the summer that was really trying to shed light on the experience of survivors at Columbia. And so we want Columbia to stop focusing on this like, number one, just abjectly racist, but idea of Black criminality and of these non-affiliates that are going to come in and commit crimes, and actually focus on supporting the survivors of like sexual misconduct within campus. The fourth is talking about banning the box for criminal history. So Common App actually banned the box for undergraduate applications, but it still exists on Columbia's secondary app and also exists on the law school and the GS application. So we are definitely on board with banning that. And then the fifth is talking about faculty hiring and departmental allocation. So this is about supporting Black students, Black faculty, graduate students, all of that. Okay, so just to close, I wanted to talk about why we as MAD joined in with the tuition strike. And so we actually released our demands over the summer, actually not the summer, in September. And so we were able to get a meeting with Columbia, with administration this fall, but it was really unproductive. They were really not interested in actually fulfilling our demands. And they were more like, well, thank you for bringing this up, but like, there's nothing we can do. And it was really hard because we didn't have the leverage that we needed. We were just like Black students and we were just frustrated with the university. But now by joining the tuition strike, we've been able to unite with other Columbia students and build power with one another. And so like 4,200 people, that's a ton of people, and like tuition is a big thing. So I don't know, I think it's been really meaningful and important for us to join on to the tuition strike and add our demands. Okay, and the last thing I wanted to talk about also was just ways to reconnect longer term with the community. So we exist in a structure that actively drains resources from our surrounding neighborhoods, yet many Columbia and Barnard students fail to engage in processes of advocacy or even just interact with like, I don't know, beyond like the steps, like beyond Morningside Park. And so some potential actions include attending Community Board 9 meetings. These are public. And by attending meetings, you can kind of see like what community organizers are doing, how to support their work. So supporting CB9 resolutions. Sometimes they have like public demonstrations. And I know it's amazing, like if Columbia students can show up and support those. Another example is to volunteer at Black-run nonprofits in West Harlem. And then even easier is just to support local Black-owned businesses or BIPOC-owned businesses. Like this is not hard. And that was one of the things that we talked about in the demands is like, for example, for ordering from the vendors list, just to increase the number of BIPOC individuals that are on the vendors list so students can support. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. This is the MAD Contacts. I'm so sorry people have been saying things in the chat. I'm like really bad at checking it while I'm doing the presentation, but thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you tremendously, Mad, for giving us that like insanely important history and context for your movement. Every time I hear that presentation, I feel like I learned 10 new things. And I also want to emphasize the portions at the end about building, sustainable and long-term power. We as students really have an obligation to participate in our communities for as long as we are in them. And we've heard as YDSA in these meetings that we've been going to that residents are still very frustrated with what's going on. So next I'll pass it to GWC to talk about a little bit of their history and how they came about and what they've been fighting for actively.
Hey, thank you guys so much for including us in this action. We've been truly blown away by your organizing and are thrilled to be a part of this. And yeah, we're here to support you in solidarity going forward through any actions that happen after this. But yeah, to talk a little bit about GWC, which is the Grad Student Union. I want to stress how long this fight has been and how consistently anti-union Columbia has been. The only times where they've done the right thing seems to have been in the face of a strike. So it took us decades to get to this point where we even had a union. The first attempts to organize were in 2004. And in fact, actually, Professor Mainai in the history department was a part of those original efforts back in 2004. That sort of died with the Brown decision from the NLRB, which said private university students can't organize. But we began organizing regardless again in 2013 and publicly in 2014. As a union, we won the right for private university students to unionize in August 2016, so right on the cusp of the Trump administration, and 3 months later, we voted for a union. Columbia, as you'll see as a pattern, delayed relying on the legal system for 2 years to avoid bargaining in our certification. And we were legally certified in 2018. They again illegally refused to bargain. So we went on strike, 93% majority vote to strike in April 2018. And then facing another strike deadline, and so we had that 1 week strike. And then in the fall of that year, we began organizing an indefinite strike. And facing that strike deadline, they offered a framework for bargaining in November 2019 to us and the Postdoctoral Union. We've been bargaining with Columbia for almost 2 years at this point, the majority of which time they have not bargained in good faith. They've mostly been patronizing and obstinate in the face of our very reasonable demands to try to win better working conditions and a living wage in one of the most expensive cities in the world. And so we began organizing yet another strike this fall. And in response to that, they've sort of begun bargaining in good faith more recently. But 2 years of bargaining will be in February 25th. And so we're building towards a strike sometime after that. One thing I really want to highlight to this audience is that as part of the Columbia decision in 2016, the NLRB ruled that undergrads are part of the union if they TA. And one of the sticking points in our negotiations has been that Columbia wants to kick you out of the unit and to avoid paying you more and to avoid being accountable for your working conditions, which is shameful, especially since you do the same work as us. And this is one of several issues that our entire unit is prepared to strike over. Beyond that, we have several other sort of reasonable outstanding issues at bargaining. So the first is obviously recognition. We want you and master's students in our union. We want you to enjoy the benefits of a higher standard wage and like working protections, including protections from harassment and discrimination. We also want union security. So Columbia is trying to embed basically right to work in our contract, which is something that we would never accept, but it's something that other grad unions have been forced to accept in the time of COVID, just because it's harder to organize. We also are waiting for them to, we are also hoping that they will cave on non-discrimination and harassment. We have a very good grievance procedure that they've agreed to that involves neutral arbitrators, discrete timelines, and union representation, but they're trying to leave discrimination and harassment as non-grievable so that we wouldn't be able to use that very good grievance procedure to address harassment and discrimination, which has been a real problem. There are several like New York Times blockbusters about harassment, especially for grad students, and there are many more that obviously don't make the newspaper. Another main sticking point is international workers' rights. We really believe, since much of our unit is international workers, that they deserve protections. We want to ensure their ability to work from abroad and timely work authorization, timely pay, and support from the university when because our international students are somewhat more vulnerable. And so this is another issue where Columbia is trying to refuse access to grievance procedures for international workers issues. And I don't know if you guys were following over the summer, but over the summer, Columbia threatened not to pay workers abroad when they couldn't return to the US. And that's something that they want to be accepted from the grievance procedure. So it'd be something that we couldn't enforce and couldn't enforce well. So that's something that we, again, are hoping to fight. Another main sticking point in our contract are health benefits. We need lower health costs, especially in the context of a pandemic. We want expanded coverage and a formal mechanism to have an ongoing voice in determining our benefits through our union contract. Columbia needs to prioritize student worker input and stop cost-cutting practices, which happen when it comes to healthcare. Because actually 2 years ago, they cut our health, or maybe a year ago, they cut our healthcare during bargaining, which is technically illegal, but we couldn't take it to the NLRB because it was mostly Trump appointees. And we were worried that they would overturn the Columbia decision, which seems to have made it through the Trump era, which is exciting. And then in terms of compensation, Columbia still hasn't put a reasonable or serious proposal on the table. We need, a living wage to make it in New York. And Columbia hasn't offered anything remotely like that. We want a common baseline hourly pay, guaranteed yearly raises, and cost of living increases. These are issues that we've been fighting for a long, long time, both within the union and outside it. But they're more important in the context of the pandemic. And there are several demands that have actually come out of the pandemic that are incorporated in our contract and that we're planning to strike over as well, such as the petition that we sent, which is for an extra year funding for students affected by the pandemic, and specifically non-service funding, that means non-teaching funding for students who have been unable to conduct research, such as, like people who go to the archives or have to do field work. They haven't been able to do anything. And so they need more time to do that. And this is a particular issue for parents and other primary caregivers who have had no support because of the conditions of the pandemic. And they need more time to finish and funding to support that. So I'm gonna wrap up and be brief, but I wanted to say that we need the Columbia community support to win a fair contract. You are essential to our chances at victory and winning, these very reasonable demands. We're in the middle of strike planning, which you should hear about more soon. And we really hope we have your support. Historically, YDSA and undergrads as a whole have been incredibly supportive of our efforts, and we look forward to that tradition continuing. And we hope you know that you have our solidarity and support through this strike and any other actions you may take in the future. We're definitely there to support, you guys. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Susanna, for that absolutely amazing kind of rundown on what the GWC has been doing. And thank you so much for kind of just the overall fight of the union. And we are entirely in solidarity. It's absolutely absurd that Columbia has disregarded the very, like you said, just basic needs of graduate students. So we're entirely in solidarity and we're happy to support the movement. I will pass it off now to Joe, who will be speaking on the CPW. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll pass that off to you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to you all. Love this forum. This is a really great movement to have, especially at a university like ours. I am a postdoctoral research scientist, and I am a steward at this union. One thing that I just want to make clear is the postdoctoral union really occurred because of the work of the graduate worker unionization effort. And a lot of what we accomplished really was only possible because of all of the extensive leverage, pressure, and organizing that the grad workers pushed on Columbia. So, it's kind of like funny and a little bit ironic that we got our contract before the graduate workers did. And I don't think that was by accident. I do think that there is a bit of scheming there on the part of the university in terms of saying, look, this group, they've got their contract, they were able to close up the negotiations. Why don't you be more mature and do the same? And so I do want to say, continue to push Columbia, whether you're at the graduate worker union bargaining table or at the tuition strike organizing efforts. I'm really grateful that you all interact with us. I think we need more interactions. I think that I don't have specific petitions or actions that CPW UAW is currently pursuing. So I'm not going to present any petitions to sign or link, but we are really, really, speaking for myself and many of my comrades in the union, we're really interested in getting more engagement and interactions with people who are doing this kind of work, like MAD, CU Tuition Strike, or GWC UAW. And it's super, super healthy for our union to see that other people who are also on this campus and on this community are doing kind of the work that we have not possibly seen or engaged with in our careers as postdoctoral scientists. So one thing I think is important is, yeah, we voted 99% for our contract in July, but there's some key differences between our union and the GWC union, for example. So we're postdoctoral researchers, and a lot of us are actually in STEM fields, and the minority actually are in humanities. So there's a bit of a flipped distribution in terms of the types of experiences that people are coming in with. And the other thing that I want to emphasize is, and I think I'm saying this because it's so important that, we actually get education from a lot of you all, is that a lot of postdoctoral research scientists have been sort of filtered to get to this stage that we're at. And we are almost at this stage, or many of us are at this aspirational stage of becoming, the management tenured aspirational faculty members. And so, there is definitely a lot of work done by the university to sort of funnel any sort of politicization that we may encounter towards, pro-university activities. A lot of our volunteer efforts are funneled towards Columbia-run initiatives, which then, of course, the university can bask in the reflected glory of, look at these budding young scientists. They're such brilliant contributors to the community, and a lot of people without the proper education will just feel like appreciated, right? That's a natural response. And I think I have been really insistent on getting a lot of my postdoctoral colleagues to come to, for example, when MAD put on a talk in the fall, and I, made sure that we do go and get exposure also to that history of Columbia, because a lot of postdoctoral scientists and researchers come to Columbia in their late 20s, early 30s. They may be coming from another country, so they have no idea. And so one of the things that some of us in the union are working towards is to be able to educate some of the incoming postdoctoral researchers just about the history of Columbia, specifically things like the Manhattanville expansion. And so one of the things that I think is really relevant is that the Manhattanville expansion's crown jewel building currently is the Zuckerman Institute. And the Zuckerman Institute is this neuroscience institute, which on its ground floor opened up a community wellness center as part of the agreement for the community development. And this community wellness center still has not opened up. When it does open up, if it ever opens up, the benefits that it provides to the community are kind of like the sort of neoliberal self-care, health insurance apparatus aligned activities. And I think as people who continue to work in that institute, so despite the wellness center being shut down for the pandemic or for whatever reason, everyone continues to work in the building doing science and research. So I think, I think it's important for the union, where we have actually over 200 of our postdoc union members are in the Zuckerman Institute in this building that is kind of at the frontier of the Manhattanville expansion. I think it's really important that we work together with groups like MAD to make sure that both the youngest undergraduates and graduate workers are aware of that history, but also that the people who may be managing them, overseeing their effort and working with them in the laboratories are also aware of that. So I think I just hope that people continue to get invited to come to speak at postdoctoral union membership meetings. When we start to have more activities, I really encourage any or all of you who are interested to just continue to reach out and try to shape the direction of this union and make sure that we are doing more than just providing services for our unit, which we're doing. We have the highest minimum salary now out of all New York City universities for postdoctoral researchers. So we're doing great things for our unit members, but I think it's really important that we keep the lines of communication open, and that you all, or whoever is interested is able to just continually come and update us on what you're working on, how we can contribute, and how we can support the ongoing efforts of the graduate workers and the undergraduates and the community that we inhabit. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you so much, Joe. The work that you guys are doing is so important. And I think it's really important that we all kind of stand together, undergraduates, graduates, and postdoctoral workers, because I think what Columbia likes to do is kind of like separate us, right, and decentralize us. And that's why I think the tuition strike is so important too, because we're really trying to build a more centralized like student movement against all the different ways that Columbia is, kind of just messing with all of us at once. So thank you so much. I'll pass it to Towns right now to do a brief presentation on Sunrise and the demand for divestment from fossil fuels.
Howdy, everyone. Yeah, I'm Towns. I'm an organizer with the Sunrise Movement. And I just want to speak a little bit about divestment. So the language in our demands letter is that Columbia must commit to complete transparency about the university's investments and respect the democratic votes of the student body regarding investment and divestment decisions. That kind of goes back to the point Lena and Joe were just mentioning, which is like, this is about a broader vision of democracy and about transparency, about having the people who actually engage with the university, the students, the faculty, the community, the people themselves, the masses, have that kind of democratic control and insight into the decision making that goes on behind the scenes made by, multimillionaire administrators right now. So why divestment though? I would say that divestment is kind of the most concrete means that Columbia has of influencing society as a whole. Columbia has kind of two responses to how they think they influence society, what they think they can do about climate change. The first is just kind of to orient themselves entirely towards individual responsibility. They want to focus on their own energy consumption on campus. They want to focus on students' consumption, recycling. They want to give everyone these nice green water bottles that were made biodegradably or whatever. That's not how it works. You know, climate change is a lot bigger than that. And the kind of neoliberal logic that focuses on individual responsibility misses the societal forces that have actually created climate change. 100 companies are responsible for 71% of all emissions. You know, if we don't take action on the level of society, we're not going to be able to change it. Each of us doing our part isn't enough. We need to band together and actually change the institutions that govern us. So that's how Columbia would first try and address it. The second way, though, is this kind of nebulous idea of Columbia being a leader in a public intellectual space. That's why, like last year, Columbia announced the creation of its climate school. It wants to kind of be at the forefront of some sort of intellectual academic discourse. And yet I think no issue better illustrates the inadequacy of this position than climate change itself. The research is in. We know that it's happening. Climate change is real. It's a scientific certainty. We're seeing the effects around us. The question is not about making more research or finding better ways of convincing the public. The question is like, do we have the political will to come together and take real action to change it and stop these kind of effects? And Columbia is an institution that is necessarily political, and the way it invests is necessarily political. And we're demanding it use its full weight to kind of throw that investment behind actual societal change. Columbia itself, they know this. You know, they know that investment where they put their endowment is meaningful. That's why they established the Advisory Committee on Socially Responsible Investing. In 2015, that committee recommended that Columbia divest from prisons, which it became the first school, I think, in the nation to do so. And then in 2017, it recommended that it divest from thermal coal. Yet that was still entirely inadequate. It was just from companies that have 35% of their revenue from coal and didn't mention anything about fossil fuels at all. You know, we all kind of know coal is already a fixture of the past. It's not actually something that when we're looking forward is really we're going to deal with. So that is to say, Columbia's rear guard and they're taking the minimum amount of action. And ultimately, this lack of action is the product of Columbia's ability to just disregard and denigrate the democratic will of students, faculty, and the surrounding community, exactly what Lena and Joe and others have been talking about. In 2018, Columbia College students voted overwhelmingly, 85%, in favor of carbon neutrality by 2030. And in 2020, Extinction Rebellion held a hunger strike with about half a dozen students in Butler Library demanding that Columbia divest from fossil fuels. Both of these demands were, completely supported by students, and yet Columbia has still yet to actually do anything. Where we're at now is that Columbia hasn't disclosed exactly how their endowment is invested. We don't actually know how much stake they have in fossil fuels. They're giving us mixed signals talking about like what is direct and indirect investment. And we as students have no kind of like democratic input in this process. They've created a climate school. They have pledged to be carbon neutral by 2050, which is far too little too late. You know, like that would basically be in line with the Paris Accords, which would see us reach, 3 degrees warming, and which no one is following anyways. But I think the most encouraging thing is the Committee on Socially Responsible Investing has encouraged Columbia to divest from fossil fuels. And so we, need to keep pushing them, but we're hopeful that that is in the works coming down the pipelines. And, I think the broader point is we shouldn't be sort of at the will of these administrators. We shouldn't just be begging them to give us, any kind of resolution they want, that instead we should be taking direct control over these aspects ourselves. And I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention CUAD and Students for Justice in Palestine. Just this fall, they also passed a divestment resolution that also passed overwhelmingly to divest from companies that were involved in human rights abuses in Palestine. And we really think that, that is the same struggle that we're taking part of, which is we need students to have a role in making these decisions, not just begging administrators. So yeah, that's fossil fuel divestment. Dozens of other schools have already done it. We think Columbia, is doing the bare minimum and not taking any actual action to address climate change, and more broadly is just an illustration of the kind of like anti-democratic, completely elite organization and government that runs this university. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Towns. And I do want to mention a little bit what Quad and Students for Justice in Palestine were working on. We are running a bit behind time, so I'll be brief since unfortunately they couldn't make it. And then we'll try to hit one of the questions that we have. And then we'll do some announcements and next steps we can all take to support our awesome coalition partners. So basically, Quad is Columbia University Apartheid Divest, and they are a joint campaign that launched in 2016 by Columbia Students for Justice in Palestine and Columbia-Barnard Jewish Voice for Peace. And they basically champion the BDS campaign, which advocates for one, ending the occupation and colonization of all Palestinian lands and dismantling the wall, recognizing the fundamental rights of Palestinian citizens of Israel to full equality, and respecting, protecting, and promoting the rights of Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and properties. So students were very much in support of SJP's demand for Columbia to divest from companies that commit human rights violations in Palestine. And this past fall, there was a referendum held in Columbia College that got over 60% of the student vote in favor of BDS to divest from these companies. And the response from administration was merely to send a letter saying that they could not do it. On top of that, Kim Liu, who is the leader of Aerial Investments, which invests in Lockheed Martin, which is a rocket and warplane supplier to Israel, was just elected to Columbia's management company, which manages Columbia's portfolio, which is a blatant disregard of student demands again. I just wanted to mention that briefly, and I really encourage you to look at the Quad's website and to look more into Students for Justice in Palestine, and I'll also be sharing some of their fundraisers that they have going on. I'm not sure if we have time for the questions, unfortunately. I hope if the people who ask questions, maybe if those who are comfortable can put their contact information in the chat for people who are curious and want to talk more about their organizations. You can maybe DM our panelists or email them your questions afterwards. I do really want to share some next steps that folks can take to support our organizations that we have here. So give me 1 second to go to that. So for the Graduate Workers of Columbia, Susanna mentioned a petition that they have going on, calling for an extra year funding for grad students and non-service fellowships for grad students who couldn't research during COVID-19. And we really encourage those to sign on and support those who can. For MAD, they have, of course, the petition from Black students to support Black students in the West Harlem community that we really encourage you to look into. And it's also linked in our demands letter. And Matt and Cooney for Abolition and Safety are circulating a survey for NYC students and faculty to share their experience with police on campus and what public safety looks like to them to get more input from the community. So we really encourage you to, if you have an experience, to speak up and look at that survey. For Students in Justice in Palestine, I've linked 2 fundraisers here that they have that are tremendously important. The first is to support a Palestinian family in Gaza that's suffering due to the occupation and COVID-19. And they have a very young boy who is in school. And so I really ask that you support them. And then the second fundraiser is to support a Palestinian college student whose home was destroyed. And so these are have been, championed by Students for Justice in Palestine and just the few students who have had the capacity to champion them right now. And we really want to uplift them since they're so important. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I'm really sorry that we didn't have time to get to the questions. I hope, and personally for me, our panelists' presentations were tremendously informative, and I am so happy to be working with them in this space, and so happy that YDSA is in partnership with everyone. So thank you again for your time, and I will pass it over to Emmeline.